When you first open up NX 7.5, you'll be presented with some handy tips for getting started with the NX interface. And let's go ahead and create a new document by hitting Control-N on the keyboard, just like any other Windows application. This is going to bring up the New File dialog that impatient clickmasters like me are tempted to gloss over. Aspiring NX junkies, take heed. In NX, it is very important to name our model and assign a working directory before getting into the modeling environment. So let's go ahead and name this My First Surface. Notice that I am using good naming conventions, letters, numbers, underscores only, with no spaces or special characters. And the folder is assigned to my desktop in this case. If you wanted to change that folder, you could come over to the right-hand side, click this folder, and navigate to whatever folder you may like to use. Once you've assigned a name and folder to your model, go ahead and click OK. Now we're presented with a brand spankin' new NX document, bare and naked as a newborn babe, but for the datum coordinate and world coordinate systems we see in the center of our 3D viewport. The rest of the interface is not only a little bit old school, it's also taking up way too much real estate on my diminutive recording screen and hence totally jacking up my mojo. As it turns out, there is a gorgeous alternative to this dinosaur interface by the moniker full screen mode. So let's look over at the top right of the 3D viewport and notice this little YouTube-esque full screen button and click. Now that is more like it. Somewhere on your screen you probably see something that looks very much like this Toolbar Manager, wherein you'll find tabs with a wide variety of fun tools, gadgets, widgets, and whatnots. Left-clicking a tab reveals the tools underneath, and right-clicking the tab displays a handy drop-down of the same. Notice that after right-clicking I can scrub my mouse left or right over the other tabs to see what's underneath them as well. There are many more pre-made tabs available by right-clicking in the empty space at the right of the tabs and checking or unchecking tool groups to your CAD junkie heart's content. I like to keep the Toolbar Manager docked at the top left of my screen. And another interesting hint, notice that if I move my mouse away from the Toolbar Manager, it fades away. And if I'm working down in my viewport and strike the Alt key on my keyboard, a heads-up pop-under with the contents of the current Tool tab pops up, thus saving us the trouble of moving the mouse all the way back to the top of the screen. Very handy. Notice also that in full screen mode we no longer have a menu bar at the top of the screen. Do not panic, my children. Click the NX icon at the top left of the Toolbar Manager for access to all the same menu bar drop-downs that you would find at the top of the screen in standard mode. Now most beginner tutorials would start out by building a cube or some other such mind-numbing nonsense, but we are industrial designers after all. So no, our first model will be a beautiful, perfect Class A quality surface. So let's create those curves, starting with the right view. I'm going to right-click in the viewport, go down to Orient View and choose Right, or hit Control-Alt-R on the keyboard if you prefer. It's going to bring us to a nice clean right view. Come up here to the Curve tab in our Toolbar Manager, and over here on the left of the Toolbar Manager, if we go to the menu bar, Insert, Curve, Arc/Circle, that is the same thing as clicking on the Curve tab and coming over here to the Arc/Circle tool in the Toolbar Manager. That's going to bring us to our first bona fide dialog within NX. Notice that it is dutifully attached to the dialog rail that we mentioned earlier, and that it's asking us all kinds of cool stuff. In this case, first of all, we want to make sure that our type is set to 3-point arc. Let's make sure that our support plane is set, instead of automatic plane, let's set that to select plane, just to make sure that this will work perfectly. And come over here and choose the ZY plane from the coordinate axis system. And now we can go back up and click on the Start option to select our first point. So we're going to start our point over here, click an end point over here, and then click somewhere along the middle of our curve to define the radius of curvature. Now once we've done that, we can drag any one of those points around to make changes to the arc. Also notice though that there is a sphere on one end of the arc and an arrow on the other end of the arc, allowing us to change the arc length without adjusting the curvature at all. Once we have our first curve defined, we can go ahead and click OK to the dialog. We can hit the Home key on the keyboard to bring us back to our original view. Now, to navigate effectively in NX, you're going to need a 3-button mouse. If your mouse has a scroll wheel, chances are it'll act as a middle mouse button if you press it. So dragging said middle mouse button in the viewport allows us to rotate our view dynamically around a center, use it to rotate the model so that we're looking straight down on the XY plane, or pretty close to it. Then all we have to do is hit F8 on the keyboard, and that's basically going to quantize the angle to a perfect top view. Then we can hit Control F, as in fit, on the keyboard to fit our arc perfectly in the center of our viewport. Now it's time to create our first Class A surfacing favorite, Studio Spline. We can go to the menu bar, Insert, Curve, Studio Spline, or you guessed it, go to the Curve tools in the Toolbar Manager and click on Studio Spline. That'll work just fine as well. In the Studio Spline settings area, we want to make sure that the method is set to by poles, the degree is set to 5, and that the associative checkbox is active. Also, in the Drawing Plane tab, let's make sure that the drawing plane is set to the View icon. And then we can just start drawing. Now this curve is going to require 5 points at least, plus 1 to create our curve because it's degree 5. I'm zooming in and out right now by using the mouse wheel, and I can pan by using middle mouse and right mouse button at the same time. That way I can navigate all with my right hand. If you prefer to navigate with the keyboard, you can hold the Control key and the middle mouse to zoom in and out, and the Shift key and the middle mouse to pan. Now I can move points around just by dragging them. That works just fine. I can also add points by clicking anywhere along the curve. I can delete points by right-clicking any point and saying Delete Pole. And I can select multiple points just by clicking them. I don't have to hold Shift or anything like that. Just click multiple points and move them. And to drop a point from the selection, just hold the Shift key and click said point to deselect. I can also box select multiple points if I want to by dragging over them. Or I can shift box select to deselect them all at once really easily as well. So once I have my curve set up the way that I want it, I can go ahead and click OK to apply that and hit the Home key to go back to our home view. Before we get to the main show, we're going to need a couple of simple support surfaces to help us out. There are 3 easy ways to activate the Extrude tool in this case. One is to go to the menu bar, Insert, Design Feature, Extrude, but that's a lot of mouse work. We can go up to the Features tab in the Toolbar Manager and click on Extrude, but my personal favorite is to hit the X key, X as in Extrude, to fire off the dialog box. You'll notice that it is asking for our first section, or what curve do you want to extrude, basically. So I'll just click on one of these curves. And it's going to ask us to specify a vector, but it actually hasn't asked us because it infers, because this is a planar curve, that we want to go normal to or perpendicular to our curve. That's fine for our purposes. To change the start and end distance values, we could type them over here in the dialog box, but instead I'm going to come over to the arrow, this little blue arrow in the viewport, and drag that until we are going down by about 10 millimeters, let's say. That should take care of us, and I can click the Apply button to end that extrusion but fire off a new one. Now I can click the arc, and it's already extruding 10 millimeters in the correct direction, so I can click OK, and we're done with those surfaces. We can go to Menu Bar, Insert, Mesh Surface, Sections, Section Fillet Row, which is a ton of mouse work, or we can hop up to the Toolbar, Surfaces tab, use Section Surface, and in the Type dialog, select Fillet Row. There are a million ways to define a conic section surface, but this one uses a start guide, end guide, a tangency face, an end tangency face, and what's going to be known in the Class A surfacing world as a spine curve. Now, we're going to get real cozy with spine curves in NX. Understanding spine curves is absolutely essential to creating high-quality surface geometry, and it's a travesty that packages like SOLIDWORKS completely omit them. But more on that later. Let's choose our start guide, and then hit the middle mouse button. Just click it in the viewport, and that's going to jump us to the second parameter. Click that, middle click in the viewport to jump to the third parameter, which is the first face, middle click, choose the last face, and one last one, we need a spine curve. Let's choose that second curve as our spine curve, and that's going to create our very first surface. Make sure that the row law type is set to constant and that the value is set to 0.6, and then go ahead and click OK. Voila! Our very first surface in NX, and life